Alright, so now it's time to export your photo. Just first of all, because I want to make sure I want to archive my PSD in the best way possible, I like to make sure everything is clean in my layers panel. So you could keep it that way with all the layers, or you could just collapse everything into a smart object so that it's just one layer. And then if you want to do different versions, like with a different curve adjustment, you could just have one layer in the layers panel and keep everything really tidy. So to do that, you just select everything with Shift, and then from the first to the last layer, with Shift pressed, you just click. It's going to select the 5 layers, right click, and then convert to smart object. So now everything is going to be in one super layer that contains all my layers that are displayed right now. So it's basically a PSD inside the PSD. So because the file is pretty big, it's going to take a bit more time. Also, I'm recording right now, so the hard disk is pretty busy at the moment. Although I'm working on an SSD drive, and I suggest if you have an SSD drive, which you should do because fortunately most of the computers sold the past 2 years, they have by default an SSD drive, a flash drive. Well, because the read and write speeds are so much faster and higher than a normal hard drive, well, it's going to take less time to do, well, pretty much anything on the photo. Everything you do in Photoshop is pretty much subject to the RAM, to the CPU, but when it comes to doing stuff with the smart objects and saving your files, etc., well, it's the hard drive that is going to work. And the hard drive is always the slowest and the weakest link in the hardware nowadays. So now we have just relight, and this one is going to be Morgan_finished. Okay, so if you double click, now it's going to open a new composition with everything we had just before. Okay, so as an archive, it's always better to have a smart object, and specifically if you give that to someone else, because not all people, not all photographers, not all retouchers work with frequency separation. They could do a mess if they try to modify these layers without even knowing there is a frequency separation going on. So it's, I think, better to keep everything tidy in just one layer. Nothing bad can happen now with just one layer unless you delete it, I guess. So now if I want to do, let's say, a curve adjustment because I want my photo to be a bit more dramatic again, like something really dark. Okay, let's do it that way. Right, this could be one adjustment. I could have it maybe with a, if we go to color lookup, let's say the client wants something that looks like with a Fuji Itana 250D, and we're going to blend that a tiny bit because it's a bit too much. Now that's it. So now we could have different color grading, different ambiances, different looks, and we can try that without messing up our compositing. Okay, so it's just one layer, it's the base, everything is finished, and now we're just working finishing touches. We could work a vignette, we could work on color grading like we just did. And when you're ready to export, this is where it gets interesting. Now, I see a lot of people doing a sharpen process, so they get a really nice and sharp image. And they do that with the default file, I mean the file that is 100%. This one is at 100% size. It's the one we just converted from camera, so we've got 5760 pixels wide and it's 3840 pixel height, which is a lot because it's a Canon 5D Mark III, okay? You can do the sharpening process on this size, and then you're going to export the photo, and this is where there is something wrong. It's probably not in that size that the photo will be displayed on the web. Let's say first we're talking web here, okay? You want to publish that in a gallery, you want to publish that on Facebook, on your portfolio, on WordPress, if your portfolio is WordPress based, on Squarespace, on 500 pixel, on DeviantArt, whatever. It's going to be on internet somehow, and all these sites, they use different sizes. to display images. They use different type of compressions, but most likely they won't display this particular photo at 100% pixel size. It's just impossible, meaning the photo will be resized. Now, you need to understand this. If you resize a photo, there is an interpolation going on, because you're asking, and here it's going to ask Photoshop, if you change the size in Photoshop, you will end up with less pixels than the original. So Photoshop needs to calculate a way to have less pixels, but you want the photo to look the same. However, on the edges, because less pixels will be used to describe what you had in the image, the sharpening process will suffer and probably disappear, because when you do a sharpen filter, it's going to increase locally micro contrast, meaning a pixel that is next to a bright pixel that is next to a dark pixel. This tiny difference in the contrast will be increased. So when we zoom out, when we look at 100%, the photo looks sharp. Okay, it's a way to trick your eye and your mind, and that way you believe that the picture is sharp. I mean, it makes you say that picture is sharp. It's just a way the human brain functions and the human eye functions. Now, you do that based on a certain amount of pixels. If you modify that amount of pixel, going in a smaller amount, these increase in contrast will disappear, because, well, the pixels won't be the same. So bottom line is, or long story short, do the sharpen filter at the exact size you're going to publish your photo. If you interpolate after the sharpen filter, your filter will suffer and the result won't be the same, and pretty much it will be cancelled. So if I do a sharp now, let's say I want to publish this photo, okay? So we're going to do I think if we do Shift Control Alt E, it's supposed, yeah, that's it. It's supposed to blend everything in a separate layer. So now we have just one layer with everything applied. And I want to publish that, okay? But I want it to look really sharp. I've got several ways to do it. I have a filter sharpen or sharpen more, which is a bit violent, but it does the job. And a more elegant way would be to go to filter, camera raw filter, and we're going to use the algorithm that is built in camera raw. And this is the third panel. It's called detail. And here it's really interesting, because what we get is a masking procedure. I'm pressing Alt key to get a preview of what the mask will be. Everything that is white right now is going to be sharpened, okay? It's going to be taken into account for the sharpening process. Everything that is black, it's not going to be taken into account. No sharpening process will happen on these pixels, because they are black, they are outside the mask. So the quantity of pixel you want to get in that mask, usually it's, well, the model, the face, hair, makeup, everything but the background. Basically this, for example, that will be too many pixels, because I've got pixels in the background that are out of focus, so they should be blurry and they shouldn't be sharpened. So this is a bit more like it. Now details is the quantity of texture you want to get in that mask. So we're too far away here, you're not going to see it. So let me zoom in for you, because it's really, really subtle. So detail, yeah, that's it, that's better. I think you can see now what's happening. So if we increase the detail, well, obviously what's considered as an edge and what's going to be put in the mask, what's considered as an edge is now a smaller amount of pixel when detail is 100. When detail is at 0, there is no micro contrast happening, meaning 2 pixels next to each other won't be considered as a detail, as a texture. Hence, the sharpening won't be increased. Radius is in everything that is being considered, like in the mask and the detail, is how thick the sharpening process will be. So it's taking into account obviously the amount, but also detail and masking. Okay, so to make your eye believe that the picture is, that it looks sharp, I have to increase the contrast between something bright and something dark. And the thickness of that is being controlled by the radius. So on a really, really, really big photo like this, which is 5,000 pixels wide, obviously you want a radius to be really important, and you kind of block at 3, but if you get a really small photo, then the radius needs to be smaller. Obviously it's relative to the size of the photo. And in the end, and I think it's really weird they presented it that way, because you need to start with the masking. You need to start with what you want to mask or what you want to sharpen, because that's what you want to do, right? And at the end, you need to know, or you want to control, well, how much, what will be the quantity of the sharpening process based on the radius, the quantity of texture, and where you want to put it. So it's really strange they present it that way, because it's basically upside down, it's all the way around. So usually I tell people, start with the masking. You need to control what will be inside the mask. Let me zoom out for you because that's a bit too much. Okay, so you need to start with, what do I want to get sharp? What kind of texture do I want to consider as details, and do I want to increase these details? And that will be controlled well with detail, 100% being the smallest contrast in this photo will be considered as texture and will be increased. And that could end up with some artifacts. And on the skin, that could look okay, but if you try to increase, say on the sky, for example, and everything that is that should look a bit smooth, then you're going to end up with artifacts inside a plain colored area. Okay, so if it's textured, if it's, for example, metal, wood, something grainy, then the detail can be okay. But if it's on a smooth surface, on the plain surface, you want to avoid putting too much detail. Now you want to know how much the thickness has to be. So we believe this picture is sharp, and that has to be set up according to the size of the photo, because 3 pixels on a huge photo won't be that much. 3 pixels on a photo that is 800 by 600 pixels, that's going to be huge. So take into account the size of the photo. For example, I usually go for a Canon 5D Mark III between 2 and 3, 0.5 being nothing, okay? Because the picture is so big, 0.5 is not going to do anything. So let's put 1.5 here. Between 1.5 and 3, yeah, that should be okay. And once all of that has been set up, then you can select the amount. And there is no alt, there is no preview for that, it's just the result in the window. And now, as you can see, we've got a pretty sharp picture at 100% size, because then again, you have to adjust the sharpening process at 100% size. Now look at this picture, how sharp it looks. Now, do you think it looks as sharp once it's three times smaller? Of course not, because we interpolated the pixel, so now the picture is smaller and looks the same with 3 times less pixels. So Photoshop had, well actually camera had to do some choices for us, and the sharpening process is now gone basically. Now let's say you work at 3 times smaller, so 33.3%, okay? You want to adjust the sharpening like this. What you will do is pretty much increase everything up to a maximum, because the way you look at it right now, it doesn't look that sharp. So I'm going to increase everything and say, yeah, now it looks pretty sharp and I like it that way. And if you publish it 100%, this is actually what it looks like. And it's way too much, but you have to look at 100%. So the values right here are meant to be controlled with the picture at 100%. And it's the same once it will be exported. Just export at the correct size. If you know you're going to export that picture at a, say, 1000 pixel height, you need to change the size and then adjust the sharpening. Okay, so I'm going to cancel that. I'm sorry if it was a bit technical and maybe a bit boring, because when it's too technical, For photographers, usually it's maybe a bit boring, but I want you to understand how it works, like under the hood, okay? So the good process will be, first you need to know what size you're going to export. If you don't know, well, it's simple. You can't do a proper sharpening process, or you just do a little one and then hope it's going to be okay for pretty much all the sizes, which is, it's not really a good way to work, right? So if I know I'm publishing this picture on my portfolio, and you probably know if it's your portfolio the size you need to export to, I know I will export to a 1500 pixels height. I know for sure, I know my portfolio, right? I built it, so it's image size, and I will say it will be 72 dpi with a 1500 pixel height. Okay, I know when the people on my website click on the picture, I have a light box that shows up with a picture on the screen, and in that light box the photo will be displayed with the 1500 pixel height version. I know this is the way it's going to show up on the website. Now let's put 100%, and now I can say I want to sharpen the picture for this particular size, so I know exactly how it will look like when the people click on it. Now it's a bit more complicated than that even. And why is that? Well, bad news is now we are in the era of responsive web design, meaning if someone is browsing your website using a mobile device or a tablet device, chances are that they have a different style sheet, CSS for your website, meaning the photos won't be at 100% size, and they will be resized dynamically by the device. And in that scenario, well, there's no way to control it. Okay, so there is a way if you get really dirty into the code, so you know exactly which sizes you have planned for each device, so for each part of the style sheet, like one for smartphone, one for tablet, one for bigger tablets, one for laptops, one for desktop devices. So you could end up with preparing 5 different sizes of your picture, and on which you have 5 different ways of sharpening. I think that's getting too nerdy into the sharpening process, probably a way overkill. But if you want to do it the proper way, that would be the proper way. And it's not even finished. Now, we are also in the era of high DPI screens, meaning what we call the retina for the Apple devices. Meaning we've got a density of pixels on the surface that is really high. And what we do, well, we export the sizes twice the size that will be on the website. So if we have like a square of 100 by 100 pixels on a normal screen, on a high DPI screen, it will look like it's 100 by 100, but actually the image behind it will be 200 by 200. So if you don't export 200 by 200, it will be interpolated and the quality will be bad. So now all the websites, all the major engines do that for you. WordPress do that for you. Squarespace is doing that for you. So when you submit an image to them, they will convert it in different sizes, all of which are high DPI ready. So it's not easy to give you a good method because as I speak right now, I don't know how you're going to publish your images, and I don't know in which sizes you will have to work with. So all I can tell is try to make sure you export to the correct size. If you know that your size will be 2000 pixels height or 1500 pixels height, do your sharpening using that size, okay? But I think what we can say for sure is if you do a sharpening on the default file, the one that is from the raw file, chances are you're going to reduce that size to publish your photo on internet and your sharpening process will disappear. That is pretty much for sure, okay? So this is the way you do sharpening before you export the photo. Now, there is something more because otherwise it would be too easy, right? When you export your photo, it depends if it's obviously for the print or for the web. So far, we've been talking about web and publishing your image on internet. But if you publish it for the print, then obviously there will be some sharpening process needed if you want to compensate for the ink. You know that the ink on the paper will reduce a tiny bit the look of your image. Your image will look a bit less sharp once it's printed on paper, and it all depends on the machine, on the ink, and on the paper. Again, there is no way for me to give you like a universal recipe to make your photos great everywhere. That wouldn't be professional to say that. I don't know where it's going to be printed, the same way I don't know where it's going to be published, so I can't give you a universal recipe. However, I can advise for you and give you some hints and tricks to get the best result possible. But the best result possible will be if you talk to your to the guy that's going to print, to the company that's going to print your photo, or to your host in the case of publishing the image on internet. So for print, you need to export depending on the paper. If it's a paper that absorbs the ink in a way that you get a less sharp image, obviously you need to compensate and sharpen before. Now, when it comes to file format and to profile, again, it's very difficult because it depends on the way it's going to be printed. Now, for the web, it's very easy. I think you should export in sRgb because this is the standard for internet. So always export in sRgb. This is not the most advanced profile. This is not where you're going to keep the biggest amount of colors, but this is the industry standard for internet. Not everyone is able to display photos on a monitor that is 100% Adobe RGB. These screens are usually for people like us that are retouching. A lambda normal people on internet, they won't have, most likely won't have a screen with such a high quality panel. Okay, so you export for the most common case, which is sRgB, and not even all the screens are able to display 100% sRgB. We are black and white here, we are doing grayscale images, so we are less concerned by this, but I give you advice that should apply also to colored image. So for internet, go for sRgB. For print, well, obviously, you need to have a conversation with the company that's going to print your photo. Now, usually what we do, if you don't want to convert to CMYK yourself, if you don't know the machine that is going to be used, what you can do is give something that is like the biggest file possible with all the information, and that will be RGB 16 in Profoto RGB. This is what we have right now. It's not really Profoto RGB because we are in a gray gamma because this is black and white photography, but otherwise in color it would be Profoto RGB. It's the biggest gamut possible. It's the biggest color profile possible. It's not good for CMYK, it's not good for printing, but if you give the company the file with the most advanced file possible, they will be able to convert the best way possible. Now, if you reduce the amount of information beforehand, they won't be able to get the best result possible out of it. So it's always better, if you don't know, to give them the best file possible and then have a chat with them to know what they can do on their side. If they want you to do the conversion, you still need to talk to them because you want to know in which profile the photo will be converted to. That would be CMYK, and then probably in the US it would be a US swap something. In Europe it would be Fogra 27 or something like this. But you need to talk to the company to know exactly what kind of printing process it will be and in which profile the file has to be converted to beforehand, so you can control what it looks like before it goes to the print. If you convert it to CMYK, informations will be different. For example, in color, there are a lot less colors that are reproducible in CMYK than RGB. That's just the way it is. On paper, there are less colors possible. There's no way around that, okay? So if you have a color photograph, chances are, when it comes to green, and specifically vivid greens, you won't be able to print them. They will look dull, desaturated, they will look different. Now we have black and white portrait, we're not that concerned about converting. However, the problem would be if the printing process is not completely black and white. If they use CMYK to create gray, chances are, if the ink are not really even, that the final picture tends to be a tiny bit magenta or a tiny bit yellow or a tiny bit cyan. and you want to avoid that because what you want is a grayscale picture. You don't want any color to be dominant. So then again, you really need to talk to the people that are going to display your picture or print your picture. There is no way for me to give you a universal recipe. So what I suggest is, so once you've done the sharpening process according to the size, you can do several versions. Srgb, JPEG or PNG, don't forget JPEG is destructive for something that is going to be published on internet. And you do a TIFF file in CMYK with the profile that your company told you to use, okay? In every cases, always keep the original PSD. That is very important. That's silly to say, but keep this file. This is the file where everything is saved. It's in RGB, it's in 16 bits, all the informations are right in that file. From that file, we can do any other file. We can do the CMYK, we can do the web version, we can do mobile version, we can do everything we want. But do save this file, which I'm going to do right now, file save. Now I'm going to show you the export panel for the web, because yeah, let's say we want to export for the web. This is RGB 16, but don't worry, Photoshop is gonna convert for us. So we're gonna say export as, and this has changed since CC 2014. We used to have save for the web, which is actually still good, but we're gonna use the latest one. And in that window, we will be able to convert to different formats. So PNG is non-destructive, okay? It doesn't compress visually the file. However, the result is pretty big. Here, as you can see, we have 2250 on 1500 pixel height because I already changed the size beforehand because I controlled my sharpening process. So if you remember well, you shouldn't change the size right now. If you do change the size right now, you do have that algorithm here that's going to say if you make it smaller, you change resample to big cubic sharper, so you keep details and it looks sharp even if it has been reduced. And something you don't really want to do is make the size bigger. I mean, if you take a photo and make it bigger, you know what's going to happen. It's going to look really blurry. But if for some reason you have to do that, you can use big cubic smoother, so the result is not too bad. Now, transparency, we're not concerned by that. Transparency is when you have transparent areas in your picture, which we don't have, so that's fine. And then, what I told you just before, convert to sRGB, and you want the sRGB profile to be embedded with the picture, okay? If you don't, then once it will be displayed on the browser, it will be associated to the one used by the browser. Some hosted services do embed their own color profile or even discard the one that you send them. So if you send them a file that is embedded with a color profile, they can discard them and resave a JPEG version. Say, if I want to publish that on Facebook, don't get me wrong, it's better because the PNG is clean and not visually compressed and not destructive. However, Facebook is going to compress that into a JPEG because they want to save some space. They have like billions of photos every day going on their server, and they want to save space because space is money, right? It will end up as a JPEG, but what you want to do at the beginning of the process when you export is having the cleanest possible file at the exact size. And what happens after that, well, it's pretty much none of your business because you won't be able to control it, okay? So try to export at the correct size with the correct sharpening process, with the correct profile. What happens after, you won't be able to control it. So now if I wanted to publish that on Facebook, for example, that I think would be the best way to do it because I changed the size beforehand. I adjusted the sharpening process using Camera Raw. I use now PNG, so I know it's not going to be destructed in any way. I can just click export all, and now my file will be exported on the desktop, for example. I'm going to click save. So it's a very complicated subject. I'm sorry we went maybe too far on the technical details, but I think it was important to explain to you that we are in a time, in an era where everything is pretty much complicated because we've got a lot of devices to put our files on. People are watching photos on internet, obviously on print, with mobile devices, with smartphones, with tablets, with desktop devices, laptops, TV screens, even in their cars. So each of these devices has got a different way to display an image. They use different formats, they use different DPI panels. The panels themselves don't display the colors the same way. So we try to reach the best quality possible without too much hassle. But if you want to be really precise, then you have to spend some time on it, and you have to create different versions of your photos. Right, so this was how to export the best way possible your photo. Don't forget, if you have any questions, you can ask me and try to explain what is your case, what is your scenario, how you want to publish your photos, where and how, and I'll try to give you the best recipe according to your details. But right now, without knowing what you want to do, it's very hard for me to give you a recipe. But if you follow what I said regarding the sharpening and regarding the profile, for print or for the web, you're in the ideal situation to get the most out of your photo. But it doesn't prevent the fact that you need to talk to your host if you're hosting the file on internet, or to your print company if you want to print it.